Welcome in everybody to the Flagship podcast interview. Very excited and appreciative to be joined by Big 12 Commissioner Bob Bowlsby. Bob, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, Chip. It's been an interesting couple of weeks, but I'm doing just fine.
Yeah, I mean, obviously on April 5th, it's announced that you will be stepping down after a decade as the Big 12 Commissioner. Um, I know you. I've known you for years, since you've been the Big 12 commissioner. You're a former wrestler, conference champion, right? At Minnesota State Moorhead.
A long time ago.
You've done it all. You've been the AD at Iowa, the AD at Stanford, now a conference commissioner. You're 70 years young. Um, and why was this the right time for you, Bob, to step away from college athletics, at least in this role?
Well, I don't know if there ever is an exactly right time. Perhaps it was the absence of being a wrong time. I certainly wasn't going to leave the conference high and dry in the middle of COVID. And we lost a couple of members last year and brought on four new members. And I didn't feel like I could leave in the middle of that with all that goes on in that regard. And so, I don't know that there is an ideal time. I was visiting with my wife about it the other night, and she said, you would have just gone every day and done what was on your desk, and you would have found yourself to be 75 years old one of these days and still working. And so, I'm glad I had the conversation with my board, and I'm appreciative of the consideration they gave me. And I indicated my intention to probably step down at some point in time, and they came back and said, "Yeah, we understand, and you've been great for the conference, but we think probably we ought to be thinking about it now and getting somebody that can have a little longer runway because we've got plenty of issues before us in the years ahead." And so it's been entirely mutual. It's been a good conversation. Honestly, Chip, I thought that I would probably retire when I got to 60, and I hadn't even taken the trip to California at that point. So, it's a I don't know if there is an actual ideal time to do these kinds of things, but the league is in good shape, and we are competitively competing at a high level, and it just seemed like it was the right circumstance and the right time.
So much is changing about college athletics, not just um, the realignment that you mentioned, but also, name, image, likeness for student athletes and the transfer portal. What concerns you most about the state of college athletics right now?
Well, I mean, just the things you mentioned are significant. The opportunity for flexibility in transfer is, I think, a good thing as long as it doesn't go too far. I don't think it's sound academically for young people to move to four different institutions in 4 years. But if they make a mistake and don't have the opportunities athletically they're looking for, may not have the opportunities academically either. A transfer certainly makes some sense, and being able to move without sitting out for that first transfer, I think is, coaches are not wildly enthusiastic about it, but I think it's a way to be fair to student athletes. Name, image, and likeness. I support student athletes being able uh, to activate around their name, image, and likeness. I also was an advocate of having some guardrails around it that would have made it harder to use NIL as inducements on initial enrollment or on transfer. And ultimately, the NCAA legal folks chose not to put some of those guardrails around that the committee that I was serving on had recommended. There were probably a dozen of them that would have made it a lot clearer what you could and couldn't do right now. But they were concerned about restraining trade and being sued again. And so it is what it is. We're spending a lot of time in the courts, and we're spending a lot of time with Congress. And there are a number of other challenges. And but I don't feel like I was running from anything. I've been deeply engaged in all of the issues of the day, and that's one of the reasons why you have to kind of find a time and decide to move on it, because there anybody that sees a period of calm water out in front of us in the athletics landscape, I would caution them it's likely a mirage, because we're just not in that sort of environment right now. And but if you could characterize athletics in only one word, you'd say resiliency. Whatever the rules are, however it's structured, we need to try and retain the best parts of college athletics. But we'll still be playing games on Saturday, and people will still be coming and cheering. The enterprise has proven repeatedly to be very resilient.
What's one or two of the guardrails you'd like to see most with regard to NIL?
Well, I think we need transparency around it. Who's involved in the deals, how long are they for? Not necessarily how much a student athlete is making from it, but are you represented by an agent or a representative? If so, who is that person? Are you an incorporated entity or an LLC or a partnership? There's just a fair amount of information that ought to be on record in a central database or on a campus database. I think some clear guidelines around inducements and the fact that this is not intended to be in addition to the scholarship. The institutions should not be making numerical offers to student athletes. This is supposed to be at their own initiative and at their families' initiatives. So I just think there's a lot of structure that you can put around it, but it all starts with transparency and sunshine, and that's a pretty good disinfectant to make sure things are going the right way.
Are you concerned that we're too far past that now? The toothpaste is out of the tube, and the member institutions of the NCAA won't act. Um, you know,
Well, time will tell on that. We'll have to see. I think we were mistaken in not providing some guidance to institutions the last time around when we had the opportunity in July of 21. I think it borders on irresponsibility for a national association not to provide some guidance, and yet there were good reasons why we didn't. I disagreed with some of them, but I still think that they would have made sense. And the fact is, you may be exactly right. Whatever analogy you want it to be, you're not going to unring the bell. You're not going to get the toothpaste back in the tube. But there are a lot of states that are involved in this space. The federal government is involved in this space, and I don't know that we're going to get an A to Z package out of the NCAA or out of Congress or out of state legislatures. But I think through collaboration and over time, it will settle down. And the fact is, you look at a football roster that has 120 kids on it. There's maybe 10 of them that are making any serious money on NIL. It's really it's been, excuse me, very highly publicized, but and there have been some reported big deals, but for the most part, the arrangements are very, very modest, and it's not a lot of kids that are making any money from it. And the fact is, it's creating some animosity within teams because some kids are living at one lifestyle and the rest are living at another.
you and I've talked for years about where the Power Five are going. What's college football going to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Um, is it just a matter of time before the Power Five or the top 60, 50, 30 um, so called powerhouses in college football break away from the NCAA and have their own governing body or football commissioner?
Well, I mean, that all sounds good, but when you get right down to it, um, say 60 football schools decided to secede from the union and go their own way. The first thing they're going to be required to do is play each other exclusively. Well, when you do that, you take 30 traditional winners and you turn them into traditional losers because we play in a zero sum environment. And we, unlike the NFL, we don't have a way to distribute the talent among the schools. So the rich are going to get richer and the poor are going to get poorer. And to some extent, that's happening now. And the you look at Division One, um, look at it along resource lines, look at it along enrollment lines, look at it big school, big endowment, small endowment, northern school, southern school. There's not much homogeneity in that 360 or so members of Division One, and so trying to make rules that are uniformly um, impactful on each of those is very difficult to do, and of course that sort of cries out for some group of schools, 125 or 60 or 30, whatever number you want to use, to go and do their own thing. One thing about it is you drag all the baggage with you. You take all the lawsuits with you. You take all the Title IX responsibilities. You take all the programming responsibilities. You take all the governmental oversight. What is it that you've gotten away from? You may or may not find that 60 schools can self-govern because 30 of them are going to be less well resourced and may have advantages that the top 30 don't have. So, getting to a smaller group is logical, and I think there are some advantages. But to think it's going to solve all the problems is not accurate, I don't believe.
We'll take a quick break here on the Flagship podcast with Big 12 Commissioner Bob Bowlsby. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will roll on. And Bob, when you look at realignment, well, we'll start with Texas and Oklahoma. Now that you've had some time to look at this, um, does their move make sense to you? Do you understand why they did it?
I actually do not understand why they did it. We've been told that it's not about money, but there doesn't seem to be any other motivation than money. In the case of Texas, they're going to make something in the low 40s from the Big 12 this year, and probably about 18 from Longhorn Network. That's SEC or Big Ten money right now. Oklahoma is not quite as well heeled financially, but it's not a huge amount of money for them either. And so, if it isn't the money motivation, is it recruiting? Is it geography? Is it affiliation? Who knows? We never have gotten any really good answers from the leadership at either institution.
The and in to some degree, it's about the schools anticipating whatever changes are coming, and making sure that they can continue to fill their stadium with marquee games. And as you said, I mean, you that's exciting and wonderful, but if you're not ready to compete, it can be a tough road. But um, I think maybe there was a sense that Texas and Oklahoma felt like they were supporting the other 8 schools in the Big 12, and that maybe they wanted to go be amongst quote unquote equals. Um, does that logic make any sense?
Well, yeah, if you want to fill your stadium with South Carolina and Vanderbilt, um, that's the same thing that you have in any league. I spent 15 years in the Big Ten, and I'm sure Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State feel like they're bringing more value than Iowa, Minnesota, and Purdue. Same thing in the Pac-12. That is not unique to the Big 12. And anybody that thinks Texas's football problems are attributable to their league is delusional. That there's a they've been in our championship game one time in the 10 years that I've been commissioner, and so it's you can put up whatever argument you choose to, but the Big 12 is no different than anybody else. And frankly, if they'd have come to us and said, "Yeah, well, we think we're carrying a disproportionate share of the load," I would guess that our presidents might have considered doing something different with revenue sharing, but we never had those conversations.
When you look at the future, and do you think the SEC is trying to become that super conference, maybe 18, 20, 30 members, and become the, you know, the core of college football?
For what purpose? I mean, you still have to have people to play. And if you want to turn college football into a regional sport, that's how you do it.
When you look at the TV, um, obviously the TV contract probably plays a bit of a role um, in your decision. Like you said, give the new commissioner a runway going into television negotiations, which will be upcoming here in the next couple years. Um, do you see that landscape changing with Amazon and Apple coming into the market finally? And what do you think the presence of those Netflix? What do you think the presence of those bidders does to the college football landscape?
Well, of the three you mentioned, only one has written any checks in the sports space. Amazon is the only one that's really gotten on board. Um, and you hear rumblings that Apple might do that, or Microsoft, or Netflix, and there will be others. There's also a fair amount of talk right now that there are other traditional cable and broadcast carriers that want to get more involved in college football, and so time will tell on that. There does seem to be an environment where there are more players than there were, um, you know, 2009, 10, 11, 12, when a lot of these contracts were put together. I think clearly streaming is the delivery system of the future, and you're starting to see a significant decline in cable households, and that's likely to continue for a while, and then it will bottom out. And I think most of that slack will be taken up by streaming modalities of one sort or another, or there may be a new technology that comes along before long. But anybody that's in that marketplace now is spending a lot of time thinking about trying to value the streaming platforms. How does ESPN Plus fit in? How does Hulu fit in? How do the others that you mentioned fit in? Amazon bought a billion-dollar position in the NFL, and you ask whether they are really in the business because they want to be in the business of sports, or if they want the verticals that go along with being able to have that vehicle to promote the rest of their business model. And so in that regard, they may be just a little different than some of the other traditional carriers, or even some of the new carriers. But I think one thing about live sports is it's always going to be valuable. It's never any more valuable than what somebody's willing to pay you for it. You can do all the analytics and all the all of the ciphering that you want to, and it's still only going to be a product of how many suitors do you have and how bad do they want it. And so I think that's what we'll find in the months and years ahead. And there are several of us, including the Big 12, that are going to be in that marketplace. But live sports will continue to be the coin of the realm, and I think we will do well, and others will do well.
It sounds like we're not going to get a 12-team playoff until probably 2026 at the earliest. Do you think at that point it will be multiple carriers getting some portion of that playoff like the NFL?
Well, I think the NFL is probably just as extracting revenue from their product as anybody that's around. And the fact that they've adopted a multi-network approach to it makes a lot of sense. You also, with a 12-team playoff, if you assume that that's what it's going to be, you're going to have 11 games, and that's a lot for one network to carry. My expectation is that there'll be more than one carrier on it. 11 games is very different than 3 games, and so I think it could be at least two, and perhaps even more than that. But time will tell on that. It probably is going to be at least 26 before we get there, and in fact, if we will have to get back to the table and negotiate our way through some of these things fairly soon, because we get to year 12, the playoff as a practical matter goes away. Because it's built around a 4-team model, and we don't even have contracts to continue a 4-team model. So some decisions are going to have to be made, and I would guess within 12 months, the commissioners are going to have to be back at the table talking through these same set of issues.
When you look at the Big 12 and your successor, um, knowing the Big 12 the way you do with the new schools, Houston, Central Florida, BYU, Cincinnati, is it your feeling that the new commissioner needs to be really well versed in television, or does it need to be someone who knows the family uh, very, very well, maybe an internal candidate from within the conference right now?
I think it has to be a balance. Clearly, um, you can't be oblivious to how media works and how it's priced and how it's negotiated. But you can hire consultants that can advise a commissioner and a staff and the schools on how all that fits together. Negotiating the TV contracts is a relatively small part of the job, but a really important part. I was involved in the late stages of it when I came on board in 2012, and since that time, we had the new football game, the championship game. We had some new streaming products that we needed to price, but the amount of negotiation was relatively small, and the amount of management of the TV products and how we use them and how we're compensated for them is an ongoing management issue. There are certainly elements of operating a conference that I spend more time on than the media, but there's not an aspect that's any more important than that. So obviously we need to get that right, and we need to make sure that we do it for the right length of time. But I think it's very difficult to be successful in a commissioner's role in this day and age without having had some campus experience. And it wouldn't have to be necessarily as an athletics director, but to know how campuses operate, where the difficult parts are and where the easy parts are, those kinds of things. If you haven't operated in a campus environment, I think you can't. It's not to say you can't be successful without that experience. I just think it's harder.
Are we ever going to get to a point where the Power Five uh, work together and consolidate their their media rights and put some geographic sense back into things, and negotiate big contracts like the NFL? Are we ever going to get to that point? We're sort of at
Well,
this most
we we aren't,
inefficient.
we aren't professional organizations. The NFL is a joint venture. It's a business. It isn't about the games. It's about the money, and it's a very different animal than college athletics. First of all, we if we were to aggregate the rights of the five conferences, we would never get past uh, uh, judicial committee and Department of Justice scrutiny around antitrust activities. It just is not possible to do it, and it's even arguable that some conferences may be able to exert market priorities and therefore would be violating antitrust. So it's a group of universities are not capable of entering into a joint venture like the NFL or the NBA or anything like that. And so that is unlikely to be part of the outcome. But beyond that, we have worked together exceedingly well for many years. We just relative to COVID, the A5 commissioners and senior staff met every day for 9 months by Zoom and by conference call, working our way through COVID. So we spend a lot of time collaborating. You hear about the times when we disagree, but generally speaking, we're like-minded and we share the same. As an example, we've been involved in a fairly extensive lobbying effort in Washington D.C. and have shared a lobbying firm or a group of lobbying firms that we've worked with. We collaborate and work together on a great many more things than we disagree on.
When you look at, I mean, two members of the Big 12 left and went to the SEC, Texas A&M and Missouri. Nebraska left and went to the Big 10. Um, Colorado left and is in the Pac-12. Do you think those schools are happy with their decisions? Do you think they're better off, or what's your opinion?
Well, I don't have an opinion. You would know more about that than I do, but I think the results speak for themselves.
And the results you're referencing are
Well, is Nebraska more successful? Is Missouri more successful? Is Colorado more successful? Is Arkansas more successful? Maybe you could argue that Texas A&M is more successful, but they left mostly to get away from Texas, and now Texas is going to be back in the league with them. So, draw your own conclusions as to whether the moves have been good for them.
um, the obviously you worked very closely with Texas and Oklahoma during your time as Big 12 commissioner, and then they went underground in making this decision. Do you have What's your feeling toward those two institutions right now?
Well, that we're going to do everything we can to make sure that there is no manner in which either of them or anybody else in the league would know that they were even leaving, because the student athletes and the coaches deserve the very best they can get. We need to make sure that their games are officiated in the same manner that everybody else is officiating. That the kids get a chance to compete and be a part of whatever it is for as long as they can do it. And that's my professional obligation and the obligation of our conference office staff and the continuing members for that matter. We're going to make darn sure that they have a good experience as long as they're in the conference. And when the time comes that they're not in the conference, then we'll suit it up and we'll compete against them in all likelihood on a non-conference basis. But it's we're not going to adopt any sort of scorched earth policy. We're going to do the best possible things we can do to make sure that their experience is just as good as it can be for the remaining years that they're in the conference.
In 2023, there could be 16 teams in the Big 12.
14. Yeah.
Oh, right. From a scheduling standpoint, how far out, do you have to? I mean, what does that do from a scheduling standpoint?
Not very much. We just need to plug in what we know to be the number, and it's easy enough to plan for 12 and to plan for 14, and we've certainly done that. We will have some conversations about going to divisions and whether we want to play in divisions in some sports and not in others. But there's nothing very magical about that. And unlike the non-conference schedule, we don't schedule out very far. We'll put out the football schedule for the fall of 23, probably in September or October this coming year, and the basketball schedule goes out about the same time. So in terms of conference schedules, we only do them about a year in advance anyway. It has some effect on non-conference scheduling, but not too much on conference scheduling.
Bob, I thought your leadership during the COVID pandemic was outstanding. You were steady and well researched. You were not emotional. You made decisions based on fact, and as you look back on your time as Big 12 commissioner, what are you most proud of?
Well, I think I have always tried to have what I state as my principles be reflected in my actions. And I'm fundamentally someone who wants to be fair, and so that's where the commissioner gets involved in resolving issues among and between institutions. And so I think if you ask our presidents and chancellors and our athletics directors, they would say that they always got a fair hearing and a fair outcome. They may not love it the way it turned out. I'm sure there are some times when we cut the baby in half, but the fact is, I start from a position of trying to be fair, and I think our schools would tell you that I have been. Beyond that, I think we have the best football and basketball officiating in college athletics, and it's far from perfect, but we work hard at the development of it. And for a coach or a student athlete, having well officiated games that don't always go your way, but you can look back on them and say, yeah, we had the best that are available. I think that's a good thing. We've been able to consistently drive additional revenue, and that always is something that commissioners are evaluated on. And I think we've led at the national level. We've had lots of issues forums that have been high profile events and taken on difficult tasks, talking about race in athletics and talking about gender equity in athletics, talking about sexual violence in athletics. I think we've taken on difficult issues because we needed to tee them up for national discussion. And so we've competed well, and we've tried to lead. And it's been a productive 10 years. I have enjoyed it, and it's the time is right to move on.
How will you look back on the Texas OU decision?
I probably won't spend much time looking back at it. I typically don't. I was a little bit frustrated when it first happened because to your previous question, it wasn't logical to me that this would have been a good move for them. But beyond that, institutions are going to do what they think is in their own best interests, and I won't. We have taken the high road since the moment we heard the rumor, and I'm not going to do anything other than that in retrospect.
Well, your legacy, you helped oversee an unprecedented number of endowed scholarships at Stanford. Your leadership has transcended multiple conferences, and I think everyone who's worked with you respects your approach, the way you've handled things day in and day out. Bob, really appreciate the time. Appreciate your thoughts.
You're welcome.
Never held back, and best of luck. Enjoy retirement. Enjoy your grandkids, and we'll catch up again down the road.
I'll look forward to it, Chip. Thanks for having me on.
All right, Bob Bowlsby. Thanks everybody for listening to the Flagship podcast. For Bob Bowlsby, I'm Chip Brown. Thanks for listening. We'll see you over at horns247.com. Until next time, stay safe and keep the faith.